Hello, I'm Mohammed from Akri, together with Jeb. We will be delivering a presentation that explores the deep-rooted crisis in northern Nigeria, where over 10 million children are in street situation, marginalized and deprived of basic human rights and dignity. This is a complex issue, and to manage it effectively, it's essential to identify the numerous variables at play and understand how they interact. The following diagram visually represents the causes of Almajiri child crisis alongside the well-intentioned but often ineffective effort to address it. This diagram reveals a series of vicious cycles that perpetuate and escalate the crisis while demonstrating how our strategic intervention could be leveraged to break these cycles and create a long-lasting sustainable change.
For generations, children from poor homes in northern Nigeria have been sent away to religious boarding schools by families hoping to give their children a religious education. This common practice is deeply rooted in cultural norms and religious beliefs, and without adequate education infrastructure outside of city centers, families don't feel they have a choice. At a young age, these children, known as Almajiri children, leave their families for cities with schools that don't have the capacity to support their well-being. The schools become more crowded as more children are sent away from home, and as a result, more children end up living on the streets. Vicious Cycle 1: The Poverty Trap. Schools in cities fail to be the safety net that was promised, and Almajiri children are destined to join an existing population of children on the streets. These numbers climb, and access to clean water, nutritious food, safe and sanitary living conditions, and proper health care is spread thin. Without enough to go around, children struggle to have their basic needs met, and day-to-day survival becomes their primary concern. As more children remain confined to a poverty-stricken life, the window to escape the trap gets smaller, and more children on the edge are pulled in. This forms a powerful force known in systems change work as a reinforcing feedback loop, where change in one direction has ripple effects that come back around the loop to drive that change further in the same direction. Vicious Cycle 2: Labor Exploitation. A growing number of children on the streets has another more perverse series of ripple effects. To survive on the streets, these children are driven to beg for money and work unskilled jobs because of the failure of the schools to adequately support them. The opportunity for schools to take advantage of vulnerable children as a source of income reduces their incentive to change, to support more children's education and well-being. Without improved capacity to accept more students, children are stuck on the streets, where they continue to be victims of exploitation. Vicious Cycle 3: Intergenerational Poverty. From as young as 6 years old, these children are unable to access quality education. They grow up less educated and with less opportunity to earn a decent living from jobs that are safe and legal. This disadvantage drives income inequality, making the affected population less equipped to meet their basic needs and, eventually, the needs of their own children, who are at high risk to be born into the same poverty. The vicious cycle of illiteracy and poverty compounds over time as it passes on from one generation to the next. Vicious Cycle 4: Eroding Accountability. People who are less educated and busy fending for themselves on the streets are not in a position to be civically engaged and hold their government accountable. As a result, education infrastructure is neglected, along with other socioeconomic rights that would benefit those who can't advocate for themselves. This lack of accountability ends up reinforcing the root problem, when inadequate education infrastructure drives parents to choose the only alternative they know, to send their children away from rural homes into cities for religious education. The short-term fix: government response. Children living on the streets in city centers is a discernible problem. As it becomes more visible, it cries out for attention with increasing urgency, and the government is burdened to address it. The government takes action to satisfy basic needs and help children get off the streets. The fix is effective in the short term and the burden on the government to intervene temporarily subsides. This forms a self-stabilizing dynamic known as a balancing feedback loop. As the number of children on the streets goes down, so does the burden on the government to continue to take action. If the problem emerges again, the government response follows. This is an event-based response strategy where the only opportunity for action is reaction. Without structural change, there is little leverage to make sustained improvement. Vicious Cycles 5 and 6. Intervention Backfire. The intervention is not only ineffective in the long term, it actually makes the problem worse. Despite the government's good intentions, without addressing the fundamental problem, the intervention backfires. As the government intervenes to address basic needs in cities, resources are drawn away from education infrastructure. At the same time, the intervention boosts the public's perception that there are more resources in city centers, which increases families' desire to send their children away from their poor rural homes. These unintended consequences form new reinforcing loops that undermine the government's efforts to improve the situation. In fact, the intervention traps the government in its own vicious cycle of endlessly investing resources into treating the symptom of the problem without ever addressing the problem at its root. Virtuous Cycles 1, 2, and 3. Redirecting Resources and Distributing Responsibility. The new proposed class initiative offers a solution to the fundamental problem, which may be paired with the government's short-term fix until the crisis is mitigated. By providing access to an integrated education solution that combines religious and formal education at the rural community level, more children can stay home, freeing up capacity of the overcrowded religious boarding schools in city centers. This will reduce the number of children on the streets and eventually relieve the burden on the government that is currently pressuring it to respond. Unspent government resources can then be redirected back to communities to provide continued investment in localized, integrated education and social welfare programs to ensure families can meet the basic needs of their children at home. These measures will set in motion a series of virtuous cycles that snowball to lift communities further and further out of the crisis. An important key to success in this initiative is distributing the responsibility for improved outcomes across the system and its diverse stakeholders, including the government, NGOs, schools, families, and communities. Virtuous Cycles 4 and 5. Rebuilding Accountability. Improving education infrastructure has another long-term benefit. It directly impacts the level of education in communities, and it also does so indirectly by keeping children off the streets so that they have the opportunity to pursue a proper education in the first place. Over time, a more educated population will be more capable of advocating for itself and holding the government accountable to address issues of public concern. A government that is informed and held accountable is empowered to do a better job for its people. Virtuous Cycle 6. Changing the Paradigm. As the government redirects resources to rural parts of the country, people's perception about where to go for those resources will shift. Over time, this shift will challenge the widely held belief that children are better off leaving their rural homes, chipping away at the cultural norm that started the crisis and one of its most powerful drivers still today. Using a systems change perspective, the Almajiri child rights crisis can be viewed as a complex web of interrelated issues where change in one place causes change elsewhere, and often in unexpected ways. Understanding this as a structure of causal relationships is essential to making smart decisions and taking action responsibly to improve system-wide outcomes. The proposed class initiative, which requires collective understanding and coordinated action among diverse stakeholders, aims to break the vicious cycles that perpetuate and escalate the Almajiri child rights crisis, moving beyond quick and temporary fixes to facilitate sustained systemic change. With the collective support of families, partners, policymakers, and other relevant stakeholders, the Almajiri Child Rights Initiative can help reduce the educational and social inequality of Almajiri children and begin to build a more inclusive society in northern Nigeria and across West Africa.